Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome, friends, readers, listeners, and viewers from across America and around the world. I'm your host, Garcia. This is FallenAngels.tv. It's a 5 p.m. broadcast, East Coast time. We're streaming out of Athens, Georgia, East Coast, United States of America. And it's 6/29/2013. I appreciate all of you taking the time to join us in fellowship and to gather together with us to celebrate the Sabbath and to celebrate knowledge, discernment, wisdom, beauty, just the worship of our Creator and His Son, and for all the blessings of another day and the opportunities and chances we have to even be part of existence, to watch the unfolding of the soft parade, to be witness to sunrise and sunset, the transition into night and the streaming of the stars, the moon, the constellations, the Milky Way. It's incredible, the drama of life and how most people just completely miss it and have no interest in being witness to the awesomeness that is creation and its unfolding. And when I look at the beauty of nature, even the blooming of a flower or the flight of a hummingbird or anything, it all to me is confirmation of the grandeur of the miracle of life and of the greater picture of how our Father, as the Creator of us all, has established all things for our benefit and for also, of course, for His own glory, because He is a part of all things. But the fact that we have chance and part to play in all of this is just a miracle that most people just completely ignore, overlook, and are devoid of any sensitivity upon. And so I implore you to use this day and this moment to reach out to your loved ones, to your family members, to your children, to overlook the little things that are sometimes nonsensical, meaningless, those things that cause division, cause bickerings and fights and struggles where we get mad at one another, because we are not promised any more tomorrows, and at any point life could be taken away from us or our loved ones. And so use this moment and this day to embrace your loved ones, reach out to them, let them know how you feel, and encourage them in whatever way you can with your walk, your example, your relationship with the Father and the Son. Let them know that you are concerned for them and for their eternal inheritance, their salvation, and their everlasting existence. And you'll have a chance to share your testimony with them. But anyways, let me go ahead and bring Robert on. Robert, are you there, brother?
I am here, and boy, am I happy. I am feeling good. I'm so glad to be on your show, and I love that resounding introduction you just gave about the Lord's creation. I think that the beauty of Lord's creation, the absolute, unparalleled magnitude of it extends all the way through everything, including His Word. And with His blessing, we certainly will bring some of that out for the people out there to kind of ponder. I'm a little bit nervous, of course, but I am glad to be here on the show.
Well, we appreciate you taking the time to join us, Robert. And for those that don't know, have not heard about Robert Farrell and his work, he's doing an incredible service for the Father and the Son and the Kingdom. And you can find him on YouTube. And it was actually just a few weeks ago that one of my listeners had sent me a link to some of his work, and I had then watched through his video and then watched a number of other videos that he has brought forth. And for those that don't know, he brings a lot of the documentation, the extra canonical books, things that have been hidden, forgotten about, veiled, purposely disappeared, and he's brought them to video form. He reads them for you, and I know that a lot of you do not have the time or the luxury to read a lot of these works for yourself, even with individuals like myself bringing forth that they are out there and that we do have access to them, and that in itself is a true blessing. Most don't have the luxury of time to be able to sit down and spend your afternoons in delving over these many different texts and study them in such a way that they can bring revelation and bless you in your life. Well, Robert has read a number of them to video form, and you can download these videos. There's simple applications that will convert his videos into MP3 form, and then you can download these MP3s to your iPad, your iPod, the different ways that you listen to even this show. Take it with you on your journeys when you're jogging or walking in a weight room, on a treadmill, or driving between jobs or to a job. Because I know that a lot of us truth seekers, because of the lack of time, we try to utilize what space and time we can to the wisest that we can to benefit our lives. And this is one way that you can study a lot of what I have been covering for a number of years. And one other thing about Robert's journey is, and he's going to share his testimony with us, and then I'll give him a chance to give his contact information and to let you know where you can go to study his work and to download these different things, is that he had a similar journey as many of us, in that a lot of us, in seeking truth, initially we turn our backs on organized religion and go seeking out to find anything that we can that would give us personal revelation and a direct experience of the divine. And I know myself that I even lived in a van for 4 years, traveling all over the country and reading everything that I could to try to access such spaces. And so Robert has similar testimony. And so, Robert, why don't you give out your contact information, where people can find your work, and where they can go to support you in what you do.
Okay. Well, first of all, as for downloading, I don't mind certainly if anyone downloads. There's plenty of downloaders, of course. Anything that I do is there to help others. That's why I put it up, and that's why I put it out. But Jesus Love, YouTube user Jesus Love 723 has set up a website. He runs this for me. It's called scriptural-truth.com. You got to put the dash in there. But what's available on this website is, like you said, many of the readings which I've done, which basically I did for my own sake. I just wanted to hear them myself, and at the time that I did them, they didn't exist. Strangely, such important works and everything, but they kind of lie, just sort of, lost and forgotten and whatnot. So I read them out largely for myself, way before YouTube ever came along, way before there was ever a venue. And just so as soon as, I had high-speed internet and access to YouTube, I, created an account and started putting those things out there so that other people could benefit from them. And it really has taken off. But that's at www.scriptural-truth or scriptural-truth.com. And there's all kinds of readings there. you'll find my book, the Super Gospel, which is a compilation of all ancient Christian Gospels. It's kind of like a harmony of the Gospels, but it's all one big thing. So it takes all of the infancy Gospels, all of the Agrapha, and integrates them into a linear reading so that, with one read-through, you can basically get a fundamental knowledge of, it's sort of a survey, if you will, of all the ancient Christian, gospel material that remains to us. And that's available there also as a PDF. Again, which I don't mind if anybody wants to download it or whatever for their own use or to share with others. That's perfectly fine with me. But those are some of the resources that I have available on that website. So my book is also available. If you go to my YouTube site, which is Apocryphile 1970, I've got a couple of links there where you can purchase the book if you want to purchase it. But like I said, I try to put everything out there for free, just so that anyone and everyone can get it. The money's not a factor. It's just if you want a hard copy or something, it is available. I think it's $19.99 wherever you get it. But basically, as far as my story is concerned, I used to be an unbeliever in religion. I've always been sort of a skeptic by nature, skeptical of people, maybe even bordering on a little bit cynical of people. But I guess it's just sort of that's the way I've kind of been all my life and everything. But, one of the things I was wary of was Christians, because people who were of a religious faith, I always sort of deemed them to be sort of simple. Like, you would believe in a giant flood, you would believe in a fish that swallows somebody and spits them up 3 days later. And, a lot of that stuff just struck me as implausible, to say the least, especially when there's nothing in your everyday, world that seems to, happen that way. You don't see the dead coming back to life. You don't see people blind from birth. It's so outside of your ordinary experience. You would almost reject it completely out of hand. But some interesting things started to happen to me as, time wore on. I used to sort of challenge God just in my mind, shaking my fist and saying, if you're really there, why don't you show yourself to me? Just give me something, I'll believe it. If you show me something. And sure enough, he started doing things in my life that, I could see his hand in it. It's not necessarily something that would translate, to other people, but, I'd ask a question and the answer would be there. I'd need something and there it would be. And it was little things like that, and I started to kind of question to myself, well, if there is no God, why do these things keep happening to me? It was as if he had taken me up on my challenge, to reveal himself to me in a way that I would understand. And so eventually I caved in, it was so overwhelming to me that I started looking at the Bible, and it just so happened by coincidence, if you want to call it that, there was a Baptist minister that was working the same place I was working. And he taught me about not only was it, it wasn't enough just to believe in God, but that you had to give your life over to him. So it sort of took it out of the sphere of just sheer intellection, and brought it into, the arena of faith for me. And so after some time, he convinced me that was what needed to happen, and I saw that was what needed to happen. And he led me to Christ. We said the sinner's prayer, and, I was changed. I literally had changed at that point. But something of my cynicism, I guess, or my basic distrust of people was kind of still there. I started going to church and started doing what everybody else did and thinking and just saying, the kinds of same things that other people were saying, because I figured, well, I was wrong. I could learn from these people, that was the way now. And it wasn't very far into it that I decided I needed to read the Bible. I needed to become literate in the scriptures, because it was a new life. I was starting over, and I needed to know what to do, and I needed to know just what it is that I was getting myself into. So like a lot of people, you start reading the scriptures, and when you're a neophyte, I think especially, or when you're close to God, you take his word seriously, and there were things that would stick out along the way, like references to books, like the Book of Yashar and other books along the way that I would notice that weren't in the Bible. And from one of my previous experiences, by the way, being when I was in college, one of my roommates was Catholic, and I, having grown up sort of agnostic / atheist my whole life, I never really went to church, voluntarily. I was dragged a time or two, but I did. His Bible actually had more books in it, and I questioned him about this because I didn't know at the time that there were these different canons. And he just said very matter-of-factly that, yeah, the Catholic book has, Bible has more books in it than the Protestant book, or Protestant Bible. And that really kind of freaked me out at the time, because how is it that you have all of these different varieties of Christians and then you have all of these different canons? It didn't make sense to me that this would be. And finally, the last straw was after having read Jude and finally figured out through reading several different Bibles and their footnotes that this was actually a reference to a book that was outside of the canon. Then my antenna went way up, because at that point, you're basically asked to believe either a writer of the New Testament scriptures or your pastor. In my mind being the way it was, sort of very black and white, very, skeptical, I guess, of men, it wasn't hard for me to side with God on this. It wasn't hard for me to side with Jude on this. And so kind of thus began my foray into apocryphal writings. I found out that this book still existed, and you had to go to a secular bookstore to order it because all the Christian bookstores that I went to didn't carry it. And, so all of the different barriers that I ran into and all the different flack that I started getting from all of my fellow Christians and from, Christian institutions like the churches and the Christian bookstores and stuff, they weren't very cooperative when it came to finding out about these things. And they weren't very accepting of people who, delved into these kinds of things and asked these kinds of questions. And so it put some distance between me and the institutions, that I was just getting into. I realized that wasn't the place for someone like me, at least at the time, because I just could not fit in with the cookie-cutter sort of mentality. And I don't know how much this, parallels your experience of it, but I suspect a lot of people out there who start asking these kinds of questions and noticing these kinds of things have a similar kind of, experience, with, orthodoxy or with institutions or with, Christianity as it now exists. And, so that's kind of how it started with me. And so in order to become familiar with these books, I started reading them out loud onto tape, because if I had an hour or two or three or whatever to put together, well, that meant that I could listen to it while I was at work, or I could listen to it while I was out doing yard work, right? Just doing this and that. And so it started kind of sinking in just what it was these people were saying. And so, the thing that surprised me was how consistent a lot of these writings were with what I had already accepted and what Christians already accept. There wasn't this huge difference between these two sets of books that people were telling me were there. It didn't seem that way to me, as I was doing it. And so years went by, and I ended up with many dozens, possibly even over 100. I haven't counted these tapes of different books because there just are so many of them. And they're so voluminous. We're talking in huge volumes of things to read, and so, that's kind of basically how it started out. Now,
hey, Robert, let me cut in here for just a second.
Sure.
For those that, as far as the extra-canonical and the extra-biblical books, what most people don't realize is that there are literally tens of thousands of texts out there available to the seeker to read and to come to discernment on, and that fill in the blanks and they give greater detail on what is the foundation of the canon. And then there are also many books mentioned within the Old and the New Testament that we no longer even have access to. And I'm talking about like the Book of the Covenant, the Book of the Wars of the Lord, the Book of the Seers, the Book of Jasher, the Book of Jubilees, and you can look this up for yourself. I'll even detail a particular document that gives mention of all these different many texts. The Manner of the Kingdom, the Book of Statutes, the Book of Samuel the Seer, all these different texts that are mentioned within the canon that we do not even have access to. And there's also particular scriptures and passages that relate these different missing books. And so there are many, many, many texts which we do have access to, and then many that we don't. And so for those that do have access to the chat room, I'm not going to mention all of them, but I'm going to go ahead and post an article there that makes mention of many of these different books that are, that are cited within the text of the Old and New Testament, but that have disappeared, that are completely missing, that we have no compilation and no resource on. And so there are many, many, many different texts out there. And so for those that, are trying to come to discernment on the different things as far as having a relationship with the Father and His Son, I would try to study what is available, knowing that, at any point some of these other texts could also disappear and that we could never even have access to them. One of the, a perfect occurrence of this that just recently happened was I had downloaded and copied a number of what are the Targums, which are the different language translations for the original Hebrew Torah when the people were taken into exile and were living in Babylon and were assimilated among the heathens and the pagans there. They forgot how to speak their original Hebrew language, and so the priests had to have certain language translations created, and these language translations are called the Targums, and people can study what are now the English versions of these Targums, and they fill in detail a lot of what has gone missing as far as what was back then knowledge that was obvious to the apostles and the early disciples of Christianity and of Christ. And those kind of things already that you can not even find the Targums in the English translation on the web anymore. And I do have access to those texts. I downloaded them and saved them in a document form. So if people are interested, you can certainly email me, and I'll be glad to give you a copy of that. But so many, many different texts. And so, Robert, one of your videos that I was so very impressed with was just the way that the apostles had approached, and specifically Jude, and had cited in his work the Book of Enoch, and how that was stripped away as being canon and disappeared really until just recently. It wasn't but maybe a couple hundred years ago that book came to light, and then it was again verified. It was found in the Ethiopic and also the I forget there were two different books that were the Slavonic, I believe it was. And
Slavonic,
so different Bibles. Yeah, I'm gonna get you to detail that and comment on that as well, and why it is that you also study all of these different texts. And if you'll give some commentary on that that whole, the story and the passage and the revelation that came to you from the book of Jude, because I think that was a very profound occurrence.
Well, I'll tell you what. Thanks for that lead-in. It's excellent, by the way. Here's where it starts. Okay, as a person who believes in the Scriptures, okay, and not everybody is one of those, but a person with simple faith in the Scriptures doesn't ultimately question the Scriptures. They may question interpretation. They may question something like, "Am I reading this right? Am I understanding it correctly?" They don't question the legitimacy of the Scriptures. And one of the things that Jude gives us is, I think, a lot of really useful information, not only for believers, but also ammunition, if you will, to take against people who would question God's Word. Because when he mentions this book, first of all, it isn't the only apocryphal or pseudepigraphal work that he mentions, first of all. He mentions in verse 9 about Michael the archangel when he was contending with the devil about the body of Moses. And so there's an interesting reference there, which is to a book that we no longer have. And several references before you even get to Enoch 14 and 15. Like, for example, when you read Jude 6, where he talks about how the angels kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness until the judgment of the great day. And the great day, of course, is the millennium, which we are basically on the cusp of. We are either in the millennium or we are practically there, time-wise. And so the chains of darkness or whatever is reference to Enoch chapter 54. And the fact that he talks about the angels having left their first estate means that those sons of God, which are spoken of in Genesis 6, are the angels in Jude's view. So looking at it, things from Jude's view, the first thing he says is that when he spoke to us of our common salvation, that it was needful for him to write us, to tell us that we should contend for the faith that was once for all delivered unto the saints. And to follow this up with so many references to so many pseudepigraphal sources sort of begs the question, is this faith that we are supposed to be fighting for these books that we ultimately lost? Because one of the things that didn't happen, at least on a large scale, was that the Christians didn't seem to fight for these books in mass, by and large. I think there was a lot of resistance to the infiltrators and the canonizers when they first came in, but they quickly took over because this book is about people who are infiltrating the church, taking over the church. It says there's certain men crept in unawares who were before of old ordained to this condemnation. And that sort of was a cryptic reference to the book of Enoch also. I forget just exactly where it says that, but talks about how they deny the Lord of the Spirits and his Messiah, which is also spoken of in 2 Peter. But one person who did fight for this faith and seemingly did fight for the book of Jude, interestingly enough, is the Apostle Peter himself. This is where the plot really gets interesting. Because, again, that sort of begs the question, just why did he do that? And to actually take the book of Jude and actually write a book around it in the sense of, like, defending it, the sense of, like, upholding it, gives it a certain special a status, if you will, in the canon, as having been the only New Testament book to have another book essentially written around it, one could say devoted to it. As if to say there were people who questioned the book or who questioned the sources behind the book, and that Peter answered that, by writing his book structurally around it. Because this is probably the most fascinating feature about the New Testament as a whole, is because you have two books. Seeing it with that paradigm, you essentially have two books out of 27 in the New Testament whose primary function seems to be to not only legitimize these books by their references to them, by their seeming defense of them. You know, and this is not insignificant. You know, if there were 2 books in the New Testament about anything at all, you know, that we should devote, you know, study to getting down to the bottom of just what it is that those books were actually about, because whatever 2 books would be writing about, it would seem to be important. And when you read the book of Enoch, it sort of answers that question in the first chapter. Because when you open that book, the way that book opens up is the words of the blessing of Enoch, wherewith he blessed the elect and righteous, who will be living in the day of tribulation when all the wicked and the godless sort of be removed. You know? So, and it says, and if you look at Farrell, it says, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in the heavens, which the angels showed me, and from them I heard everything. And from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come, concerning the elect, I said, and took my parable concerning them. So, taking all of these facts into account, it takes a little bit of insight here, but once you see it, it's sort of impossible not to see it. What seems to be happening is this. There was a belief early on in Christianity as to the veracity of these extra-canonical, and I don't say extra-biblical because the book of Enoch is quoted in the Bible, the Assumption of Moses is quoted in the Bible, the Wisdom of Solomon is quoted in the Bible, etc. There are these biblical quotes. So to say that it's, you know, extra-biblical isn't really technically correct. It's extra-canonical. And the thing about these extra-canonical books, the way in which Jude seems to be devoted to them, the way in which Peter takes Jude under wing, if you will. And he even caps it off with an interesting proverb. He says, look, these men are like a dog that returns to its own vomit, and like a sow that once washed goes wallowing, you know, back in the mud. Well, the interesting implication of a statement like that is the dog that returns to its own vomit is from the canonical book of Proverbs, chapter 26. But the part about the sow that goes wallowing in the mud is from the pseudepigraphal story of Ahikar. You can look this up, Ahikar 7, verse 27. And if you look that up, you'll see the very same proverb. So here you have Peter not only defending Jude, but also quoting another pseudepigraphal source of his own. You see? And so what he's doing is he's answering this question structurally. Because, see, when Enoch says that it's not for his generation, that means it's to be excluded. But it is for a remote generation. He means that at some point it will become included. And at some point it will become recognized. So, in other words, you're not dealing with the simple question of is it inspired or is it not inspired? Because the question is more along the lines of who is it inspired for and when? And Enoch answers that question first thing in chapter 1. So Jude, having gotten all the way down to verse 1:9, right, certainly read verse 1:1, verse 1:2, verse 1:3, and got that knowledge, had that knowledge clear in his head, knew that that book was for a future time. Okay? Peter must have also, having taken up Jude and defended Jude, must have had that very same insight. The book was not for his generation, but for the generation at the time of the Lord's coming. And so this explains why Jude and Peter are written the way they are. Because someone had come up to Peter and, let's just say, asked a simple, straightforward question. Is it cool to read books like The Assumption of Moses? Is Enoch actually inspired? Should we have this in our canon? Well, ordinarily you would think he has two choices. He either says yes or he says no. Now, apparently this is a question because he's addressing it. But he doesn't exactly say yes or no. So by keeping it in suspense, he allows what is supposed to happen on its own. In other words, because it's left for men to surmise just what it is that he means by taking Jude to himself. In other words, is he watering it down or is he defending it? You know, is he giving us reasons to reject Enoch by leaving out that quote? Or is he keeping it out of the canon until such time as it's meant to be reintroduced? You know, and that's an interesting question because the answer really lies in the fact that he very easily could have said yes or no. He very easily could have said, no, Enoch is bogus, all that stuff is fake. Or he could have alternatively said, no, Enoch is genuine. The assumption of Moses is genuine. But either one of those answers would have spoiled the entire purpose of that book, to not be for his generation, to not be for the generation of the interim, but to be for the final generation. And here we stand at the cusp of that time. Literally, according to biblical chronology, we don't know the exact day, we don't know the exact hour, but we have a pretty good idea we're right at that point somewhere. I mean, Jesus was only 2,000 years ago. And, so at the time, there were 4,000 years into it, according to many chronologies. I know they don't all agree, and it's hard to pin it down. But according to most chronologies, biblical chronologies, we're very close to that cusp between the 6th millennium and the 7th. So it should be about time for that book to show itself, if indeed that were the purpose of that book. And yet we have all of these arguments already within the canon, like a ticking time bomb, ready to go off at any time. And yet we don't live in a climate where these truths are told, these things are mentioned or studied by the people at large. It remains relatively academic, in the world of Christendom, and it's not something that's preached in the church, even though it should be. Because, in what way is Jude 14 and 15 any less scripture than, say, John 3:16? You can argue, you can quibble about it, but it's just as scriptural. And therefore, from the point of belief of a believer, it's just as valid. And it does bear upon our salvation, by the way, because when Jude spoke of our need to fight for these books, it was in the context of his writing to us of our common salvation, as opposed to our individual salvation. In other words, once we as a church, once we as the body of Christ, arrive at the collective insight and agreement that these books are what they are, that when he's quoted Genesis and he's already quoted the assumption of Moses, and then he says Enoch also, all right? He's giving you an argument that includes the book of Genesis. He's giving you an argument that includes the assumption of Moses, and he's giving you an argument which includes the book of Enoch. So that's the inclusiveness of the word also. Enoch also prophesied. He calls him the seventh from Adam. All right? So if Jude is to be believed, it is Jude's belief that this was the antediluvian Enoch, and that he was the seventh from Adam. So this is Jude's belief, but it's not the church's belief, and it's not the scholars' belief. And it's not something that probably, 99 out of 100 ministers would even tell you, even if you ask them that that's the case, because they don't believe it either. They've been conditioned to listen to scholars. They've been conditioned to listen to theologians and to traditionalists, and just following sort of common sense human type knowledge, rather than the knowledge that has been laid before them to follow, which is the Word of God. There in the Word of God, you have it written that Enoch is also included in this argument, so it's inclusive of that, that he was the seventh from Adam, therefore antediluvian. That's a datum. How do we treat data? When God is giving us perfectly straightforward information that we can either choose to ignore or to accept, what do? It exists. It's there. So what good does it do to ignore it? One way or the other, whether you're for it or against it, to just go with the status quo, to just go with the flow, just because it's the easiest thing to do, doesn't necessarily make it right. So there's this whole mechanism that's in place for us to bring this book into existence. So that's a serious, situation. How do we deal with that? And for 2,000 years, we've done very little to deal with that situation. Peter stood up for Jude and fought for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints, but we haven't. But maybe it's time that we do. Maybe this is the time.
Absolutely.
That this is the generation. According to the scriptures, it would seem to be.
It's my belief that we are the final generation, and we are that generation, the fig tree generation that Enoch mentions in his book, where he speaking about having written this for the final generation. We have a question from the chat room that I wanted to ask, but before I do, I want to place into context this particular question and read something from the Gospel of Thomas, which I had asked Dr. Lumpkin about as well. In verse 39 of that particular text, it says, Jesus said, the Pharisees and the scribes have taken the keys of knowledge, gnosis, and hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed to enter those who wish to. You, however, be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves. Now, I'm not, this is my first time interviewing Robert, and even though we've spoken, I'm not positive on how much you know as far as the two different bloodlines, the two different lineages, and Cain being not of Adam, but being of the serpent. But the question that has been put forth from Night Watchman in the chat room is, could the exclusion of these books from the canon in some way be connected to the deception promulgated by the descendants of Cain, who Christ in the New Testament, specifically in Matthew chapter 13, he says, that the tares, the children of Cain, that they are the Pharisees and the scribes, mentioned here in this passage, verse 39, that are the ones that have taken the keys of the knowledge. And it's my opinion that they've done much of this, and that even the canonical process was not to bring truth to the people, but done more so to hide and to disappear and to veil and to keep hidden knowledge and truth from the masses. But could you share your opinion on all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll put it like this. I think I know what that knowledge is, first of all, and I do believe that I can at least give people the beginnings of this. It's going to take a while, and it's going to take a lot of people out there searching these things out and helping everyone else out, because the elect are never mentioned in terms of singulars. It's never one person. It's never this other person. From your experience, then you've had an inner calling. I know from my own experience, I've had an inner calling. I've spoken with lots and lots of people who tell me the same thing. Just something is waking up inside of them. Something is, just in it. And this is what God is doing. As far as what that knowledge is, when, for example, Jesus says, from the blood of Abel to that of Zechariah, whom you slain, meaning the scribes and the Pharisees, right? Between the temple and the altar. What did the Pharisees have to do with the blood of Abel? Exactly. He says it's so that all blame may fall upon this generation. So what does he mean by generation? Well, from the time of Abel, right? Who slayed Abel? It was Cain. It was his seed. It was his bloodline, right? The scribes and the Pharisees couldn't possibly have slaughtered Abel. We know who did that. So why is he blaming them? He's not really blaming them in particular. He's blaming that generation. That from the very beginning, there has been a seed that has walked alongside us as though they were one of us, as though they were among us. All right? And they think a certain way. And their thinking is sort of infectious, I guess is the word. It seems logical. It's plausible. It's specious. If you look out into the world where science predominates, where the intellect of man predominates, and this is what's happened with the church, really. But as far as, because they've fallen prey to the whole logic. Anytime you ask somebody why Enoch was left out of the Bible, they don't appeal to scriptural evidence exactly. They appeal to human logic. They say, oh, come on, the giants couldn't have been 3,000, 4,000 feet tall. Come on, the angels don't come down and, mate with the, they tell you all kinds of things that seem plausible. But see, that's where people buy in, because it's easy to just be a naysayer, but it's hard to be a believer in the face of a whole bunch of other people, a world populated by people who don't think the way you do. And you always have to swim against the current. And it does. It takes a little bit of I hate to use the term rebelliousness, but that's kind of the way it is. You know, you have to stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going to go with the flow. You know, I'm not going to say what everybody else says. I don't believe what everybody else believes. Those keys, that knowledge, the reason they had to hide it was because it was condemning to them. When you read in the book of Revelation, for example, about the sword that cut off one of the heads of the beast, right? What else does it say in the book of Revelation about the sword? That out of his mouth comes a two-edged sword. That sword is the word of God. And all of these different heads, different millennia, there's 7 heads and 10 horns. There's 7 heads for the 7,000 years. There were 7 days and 7,000 years, 7 heads and 7,000 years. Okay, and when it says that this head was cut off by the sword and then it grew back, what it means cryptically is that there, after 4,000 years, at the very beginning of the 5th millennium, there was the sword of God's word that had taken and triumphed over this beast, that had killed it. And that is the knowledge of his word, the keys that they went and hid. So if the word was the thing that chopped off that head, how do you get that head back? Because you have to disarm and disable the word. And the way that you do that, the way that the devil did that, was because there is a heavenly meaning couched into every earthly meaning that you see within the scriptures. In other words, the heavenly has couched itself or hidden itself within the image or within concrete terms. And you can recover these keys. These keys are recoverable if you know a few tricks. I hate to call them tricks, but just for the sake of simplicity, they're things that you can look for. And then as you look for them, you start noticing them. And as you start taking and generalizing that information, then you start to notice that it keeps on working. You know, and it keeps on revealing other things, and it leads to other knowledge. And it's all consistent with what we've been talking about. There's knowledge that's been taken and hidden. There's literal information that's been taken and hidden. There are things that are before our eyes, like Jude, like 2 Peter. You can see from the very fact, for example, that they took Jude and buried it away from 2 Peter. They didn't want you thinking about these things. This is one of those ways in which they hid things. They took and buried it, right? Took it away from its context so that you would notice it. That's one thing. But, like, for example, when you understand a few things like the meanings behind words, that every word has its parabolic meaning. Like, for example, doctrines, winds of doctrines. Do not be blown about by every wind of doctrine, right? Well, if you just take it in the sense of a parable, that when you see the word wind, what you should be thinking is doctrines, right? Or when in Jude or in James, where it compares these unstable people to wild waves of the sea, right? When you see the imagery of a wild wave, well, what's attached to that meaning is the wavering, the unstable people, as Jude puts it, they're wild waves of the sea foaming up their own shame. And then when you see, for example, in John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and a little bit later it says that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So, in other words, Jesus is the Word incarnate. And then with Peter, for example, he says, okay, that when he had gained his insight, he says, well, thou art Peter, and upon this rock will I build my church. So Peter is associated with rock. And the reason why I bring these all up is because, okay, now that you have those kind of given keys, that kind of information, to just give it to you, just straight up, if you know what to look for, it's just metaphors, right? It paints a picture. Because, like, for example, when Peter is crossing the sea, if he represents the church, okay, and Jesus, who is the Logos, comes walking across the sea, which is time, and they all think he's a ghost. They don't think that he's real. And he says, if you are who you say you are, Peter being the church, right, then summon me to yourself, right? And Jesus says, okay, sure. Yeshua says, come on. And so Peter, who represents the church, is looking at Jesus, who represents the Logos, right? And as he's approaching Jesus, he is able to walk upon the sea being this age. He sent them out ahead of him, right? So this is a time element. And as soon as he starts walking upon the sea, or it is transcendent of this age and this people and this teaching, in other words, it shows us that through looking at the Logos directly, like as in confronting what we're seeing in Jude, confronting what we're seeing in 2 Peter. When we keep our eyes on the Logos, we are capable of transcendence. The church once had this transcendence. This is the information that's being imparted to us through these codes. Okay? And so when the wind, or these doctrines, because remember when they were rolling, the winds were contrary. So the doctrines were contrary. So when he took his eyes off the Logos and started to pay attention to the waves, which are these waverers, right? Which these infiltrators, the wild waves of the sea, they're foaming up their own shame, right? So it's painting a picture, and by means of that picture, when you take those keys and then decode based on your observation, based on your knowledge of how to get these keys and how to use these keys, right? And just keep on using these keys. You know, anytime you want to know something, you just keep on plugging them in until it reveals itself to you. That Peter, the church, sank into the world, in other words, because he was paying attention to these false doctrines and these infiltrators of the church who are the wild waves. And that he sank into the sea, which is this age. And that's basically where we are now. And then it's the Logos, then, which is the Word of God itself, that now pulls the church up and out of it, right? Mm-hmm. And so that paints a picture of how we are to end up. You know, how by looking back upon and reaching out to the Word, the Logos itself, we can be saved from this age, you know? So there is a happy ending to it all after all. Sure, we sink into the world. Sure, we become, in effect, defiled by all of these false doctrines. And we have our transcendence stripped away from us by these infiltrators of the church, you know, as happened to Peter. You see, then it's telling us what's going to happen in church history. So this was all coded in prospect. So now, in retrospect, as we look upon it and we regain these keys, right, now we can use this to preach the good news, if you will, to the world, to let them all know. Now we're gaining eyes to see, we're gaining ears to hear, you know, and we're putting this piece by piece together into a giant puzzle that is complete, that explains literally everything, you know. And the longer I've looked at it, the more I've looked into it, the farther it goes. I've never seen an end to it, and I've never seen where it didn't work. You know, right. To me, it's just, and I've been at this for 20 years. I've never seen where it didn't work, you know, and that's what's impressive to me more than anything. Because as a skeptic and as somebody who really has a strong sense of what's rational and logical when it comes to facts and data, you know, for Christianity to contain all of this information inherent within it, and yet people don't see it. And it's spread out literally throughout the Scriptures, and people don't see it. And it's scattered across the Scriptures. See, that's step one. Then when you go to the book of Enoch and you see the reservoirs of the winds, then you think, oh, doctrines are being let out at certain key points because the winds are doctrines, right? And then you realize what he means by, he took up this parable and said, Enoch, a righteous man who opened it. It's because you understand that this book is also written in the language of parables. And that all of these books have that common underlying parabolic aspect to it. Now, of course, they're going to take those keys, like the ones I just pointed out, and there are many others too, you know, and I provided, by the way, a PDF of the keys on the Scriptural Truth website if anybody wants to download it by PDF. And I'm still working on it. I'll probably be working on it forever, but you know, it's fairly complete, or not complete, but fairly, you know, usable. And in any case, but that's why they had to hide this stuff. Then there were things that were encoded in the Old Testament that must have been just as revealing to the people at that time to see these keys as so threatening that they had to be taken and hidden. That's why they did it. You know, it wasn't just about power. It was about their being done with, you know. It was about their end, you know, them being judged, you know. And it's not hard to see from their point of view why they wouldn't want these things to be known. They wouldn't want that to be cut off. They want to be able to disarm, with the fleshly end, if you will, of God's word. They want you to see winds as winds and waves as waves, and then Peter is Peter and Yeshua is Yeshua, and that's it, right? So that's the fleshly end of the spectrum. So he had sort of a choice. Either he was going to infiltrate the church and play up the fleshly aspects, or he was going to let the church be and let these ideas flourish. So in a way, he was sort of maneuvered into the position of having to run the church. That was the position that God essentially put, Lucifer and his dominions in, was that of our caretakers, that he would turn into, if you will, an angel of light for the purposes of creating a substitute light, which was provided him, by the way, because also in the book of Revelation you see that a great sword was given him. And since the sword is God's word, it means that he used God's word, in other words, to destroy the church. And the way that he did it was by enforcing the old canon, the Pharisaic canon. That was a false concept, because when you understand how to read the Word of God, there are not these boundaries. They don't exist. Wind is doctrine, whether you're looking at Wisdom of Solomon, whether you're looking at Paul's writings, whether you're looking at the book of Enoch, it all translates just the same way. And so that whole image of the beast, which is the religious system, gets destroyed by this knowledge. And so this is the power that it contains and the promise that is inherent within it, for us to be able to overcome it. After having gone through this 2,000-year period or whatever, we can finally cast these people out of the church and bring a restoration, and, go back to the way it was at the beginning. Because the end is at the beginning. That's the original teaching. We arrived at what we knew from the first. And that's essence of it, to try to get that back, to fight for the faith that was once for all entrusted to the saints.
Well, I see, a great awakening happening along that line, and there is a great movement because one of the things is that people that have relied on pastors and preachers and mainstream organized churches and religions, they are seeing things, the esoteric and supernatural nature of the world, being witness to things like the fallen angels and ghostly apparitions, things that cannot be explained, even though they're veiled and they're contained within the Word. Those that are teaching them are not giving people the answers. And so a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to start to do some of their own homework, some of their own research, and they're seeking deeper than they ever have before, especially now that, so many have been awakened to the conspiratorial side of what is reality, the New World Order, Satan being the power, principality, the ruler over this fallen state of being in this fallen world. He even tempted Christ and said that if you would just bow to me, I'd give you all the kingdoms of the world. And so people are starting to seek deeper answers. And for those that, woke up to like the events of 9/11, different things like that, their research into those aspects, the demonic aspects of who the fallen angels are, the line of Cain, and how they're responsible for having stolen and hidden and stripped away so much what is knowledge, is bringing them also back to study of the Word. They're being led to chapters like Genesis chapter 6, where it speaks about the sons of God mating with the daughters of man, creating a race of giants, how this race of giants became cannibalistic, and how they have been warring against the seed of the woman, the seed of the serpent warring against the seed of the woman, explains, the megalithic structures found worldwide, all these different things. And so people are being led to the truth of the Word, and it's individuals like yourself and myself that are bringing forth all of these other extra canonical books, which the early disciples, apostles, and followers of Christ they knew a lot about this knowledge that we're bringing forth again. And so it's creating a great awakening. It's assisting people to be responsible for their own discernment. It's giving them a direct relationship to the Father and the Son in such a way that now when they read the Word, they're truly having the eyes to see, the ears to hear, and the mind to understand. Christ said, speak I to them in parables, for they seeing see not, and hearing hear not, and neither do they understand. But this is the generation where the Spirit is being poured out on all flesh, and Christ is going to people in their dreams. So many are being awakened to the great war and the battle that we're in. And so, most people beforehand had no idea of the contest, and had no idea, nor really any interest in the deeper aspects of life, our higher purpose, our role, our missions for being here. Nobody really was even questioning, what this life is about, who we are, why we're here. Everybody was basically comfortable, like the Laodicean church, just amused by the vain entertainments and distractions of this world. But things have changed to a large degree, especially over the last 10, 15 years, and especially since the events of 9/11. The economy's been inflated with debt. Children are being forced to move back into with their parents. The American dream has been busted, and so people are being forced to seek out answers and to look at life with renewed perspective and to try to understand the deeper aspects of it. We're refined by fire, and we're still at the beginning of sorrows. And so, but there is a lot of seeking, and people are no longer just okay with the prosperity doctrine and that everything's okay and that we're going to fly out of here anyways, and you don't have to worry about any of the things that are coming upon us, because people are struggling, and they're having a difficult time feeding their families. There's outside of every major metropolitan city now, there's tent cities. There's not enough good jobs available, and people can sense the urgency of the times that we're in, and it's just a matter of peace comes sudden destruction, and that at any time the world could be turned even further upside down from where it is. And so I think with the youth, they had once been so hopeless and not being given the answers to really understand and to what we're dealing with as far as the reality. But there are so many people that have stood themselves up, individuals like yourselves and myself that have taken on the role of being a watchman to the people, that have decided to sound the trumpet, even at the risk of our lives, to do the work of the kingdom, to make that a priority. And the Father and the Son have awakened so many to the discernment of what's going on that the answers are now making themselves available. And those keys which have been hidden for so long are presenting themselves again to the people, so that if you really seek and if you're really hungry to know, there is availability as far as truth out there to lead you to correct discernment. And so, Robert, let's get you to comment on that, and then I'd like for you to, because we're quickly running out of time, I'd like for you to once again give out your contact information and then talk a little bit about what you see coming as far as the short term, the future.
Okay. Well, first of all, again, my contact information. If you want to download any of the PDFs or you want to download the Super Gospel, a great many of my readings and whatnot are available at www.scriptural-truth.com. You can always go to my YouTube site, which is Apocryphile, APOCRYPHILE, 1970. And, again, I don't mind if you use the YouTube downloader or whatever to download any of that stuff. Fine with me. I like to support my channel, but, of course, more important if you guys have that information and use it. Because, again, speaking of what you just mentioned, I think that a lot of us have been at this for a long time. Some of us probably have a decent head start over others. I know I've been at this for 20 years now, actually longer than that. Because I hadn't been a Christian for very long before I started coming to these conclusions. I just barely got my feet wet in it, and quickly realized that there was so much more to it than people were saying. And so I've been at this for a very long time myself. And I think it's because when he says he comes, he's going to come quickly. And that there are going to be people who are ready, and there are going to be people who aren't. And when And this is why we really have to shout this from the rooftops, because, we are essentially involved in this whole transition. There is work for us to do. There is this for us to, and the function of the elect, just to let you know, we are not at odds with the church at all. One of the things that I don't have time to go into now, but just as I mentioned before, how Peter has a specific meaning and has to do with the church, the Apostle John also has a specific meaning, which can be derived, I'll go into it some other time, but, that he actually has a specific meaning too. But what you see is that Peter and John work together. John represents the congregation of the elect, because remember, he is there until Jesus' return. If it be my will that he should remain until I come, right? And he was one of the three pillars. There was James, there was Peter, and then there was John, right? And so, in any case, there is a pillar named John who represents the elect, who is remaining. And remember in Revelation also he says, I will make you a pillar in the house of God, right? So in other words, by associating us with John. But in any case, what you see is Peter and John working together, like in the book of Acts and in the, where they run together to the tomb, and John is always giving deference to Peter. What that is it's a detailed and intricate set of instructions for the elect to follow in order to deal with the church. That everything is for the sake of the church. That John outruns Peter to the grave, and he sees the grave open there, but he allows Peter to enter into it. And this is to tell us, who are held back until the time of the end, that our first duty is to the church, and our first duty is to show ourselves deference to it. So we have to do whatever it takes to bring this message not only to the world at large, but to the church. So we cannot pit ourselves against them, because that is not what we are called to do. We are here to help them. Now, the people that are running it, a lot of them may not be open or receptive to it, which you kind of feel like they're going to come around. But what's going to happen is this, and this is detailed in the book of Enoch, chapter 45 through 50, which I won't have time to go through all of it. But anybody who's interested in what the near future is going to be like, that's a really good place to start, because it explains to us just what it is that's coming. There is the congregation of the righteous shall appear. All right, so that's step one, right? So in other words, this is kind of essentially what's going on now. The elect are starting to show up. So we're already seeing this come to pass. So this is Enoch, I got it here, 38:1. So the congregation of the righteous shall appear, and the sinners will be judged for their sins and shall be driven from the face of the earth. So how is this accomplished, first of all? Well, if the answers have been hidden from us, and all of a sudden they come to the foreground, well, people start seeing them, right? Then that empowers us to take it to the take this issue to the world, to force the issue, right? Because if the wicked are whatever driven from the face of the earth, then it is through the righteous ones that this says. It says, and then the righteous one shall appear before the eyes of the righteous, whose elect works upon the Lord of the spirits. And he shall appear to the righteous and to the elect who dwell on the earth. And so then it says there won't be any dwelling place for them after that. And so, like, for example, when these things are known, there won't be any place for the previous doctrine. There won't be any standing for it. There won't be a way in which the lie can perpetuate itself anymore. And so them, with their whole foundation cut out from underneath them, they are completely vulnerable, insofar as they will no longer be able to pass these things off. Because they don't hide these things for nothing. When you hide truth, okay, it only lasts for as long as you hide it. And once that truth becomes known, once the cat is out of the bag, right, then all of a sudden the jig is up, because you have that was it. That was all you had, right? And so by telling the truth and by forcing these issues, because remember, Jude told us to fight for this faith. He's actually asking us to do something. So this is a call. This is a call to arms. And, the elect are going to be somewhat confrontational, somewhat militant. But, again, when you look at the interaction between John and Peter, and if you want to get a better idea as to what I mean by that, by the way, a good place to go is the Peter Principle. It's one of my videos that I have up on my YouTube site, the Peter Principle and the Keys of the Kingdom. It explains the spiritual significance of James and Peter and John, and how when you see those three interacting, you understand them to be the three pillars, the Jews, the Christians, and the elect who are to come. And again, I explain that a little further. But if you want a guideline or a template for just how it is that we are supposed to act, that template exists. And it's just as you would expect, that God would actually lay down in the form of parables a detailed set of instructions as to just how it is we are to play this thing out, and just what it is we are to do. But it's only accessible once you have the knowledge of the keys and this hidden wisdom. You see? And so, in other words, this is very dangerous to the wicked one. This is very dangerous to his generation and to his seed, and to those who side with them, because this really does spell the end, because it's all been kind of a sham, something that was taken from us, that we have been robbed of what was our birthright, that we have been cheated out of what was supposed to have been given to us freely. And that the apostles themselves, by placing an antidote in the form of 2 Peter and Jude, first of all, within the New Testament, for us to come across this insight in due time in order to effect this change and to give us the weapon of the Word, because they killed with the sword. Remember, they were given the sword of God's Word to, in other words, to force the fleshly issue, to force the superficialities. Because by having taken the keys, all that was left was the superficialities. We didn't know what the words meant. We didn't know the significance. We didn't understand the higher from the lower, right? We couldn't understand the heavenly things because we didn't understand the earthly things. But by the return of these keys, by the return of these insights, now the earthly things are revealed to us, and contained within those earthly things are heavenly things. And so this is exactly what Jesus is talking about. But if you have to understand the earthly things in order to understand the heavenly things, because the heavenly things have been couched in the earthly. But the upshot of it is that it's all there to empower us. And it's all there to create a situation where we can stand and be bold, and really just about as pugnacious and insistent as we need to be in order to make these things happen. This is a call to arms, and frankly, it's nothing short of a revolution, and the important thing to realize is because the instructions are there, because the information is present, we all know just exactly how to act, and since we all agree on the source, then we all legitimately will look to one another to act according to a certain ethic and a code. So everything is there for us. We have been given every weapon we need to pull down these strongholds, and that is our function. We're not just supposed to disappear and go away and let the world just go to pieces. We are here to stand up for the truth. We are here to fight for the faith. We are here to be heard and to shout this from the rooftop, and to be absolutely emphatic about it and to not back down, because the people at the beginning of the church age gave their lives over so that we could have this information. They wrote these books so that this information could be recovered. They did what they were supposed to do. And we have the knowledge that we have because they obeyed. And now it's our turn to free them from the prisons of ignorance that they've been, held to by men and by their lack of discernment, by their lack of opportunity, perhaps, to understand it. That's been brought upon by the hiding of this knowledge. And the more you look into it, the more you know, the more you realize that there has been a hand of evil in this all the time, and yet there has been God's hand in this as well.
Yes.
And He's made it recoverable. And I believe that you're doing what you know to do to recover, this mystery, for the people. And then I'm doing the same thing. And then we've been called to do this independently of one another, each of us. And I'm sure there's a great many others of us out there who feel this urge, who feel this leading, and you're doing what you can to put the weapons and the tools in the hands of the people. I'm doing the same thing. We all need to do that. We all need to do whatever we can to make sure that this does happen, because this isn't just mere intellection. This isn't just academic. This is real. It's actually happening, and that the reason why we can do this is because God has put this in there for us to find, for us to realize in due time. And looking at, where we are in time, this is the time to do it. So all the pieces are in place. All the pieces are there. And, it's just a matter of our boldness and our willingness to stand up for truth. Because He says, I will give you a mouth and a wisdom which no one will be able to deny or to gainsay. And see, why do they avoid the topics? They avoid the topic because there's really no way to argue around it. The position is largely indefensible, against the book of Enoch because of what Jude says and because of what Peter did. They knew what Peter did. That was why they took Jude away from Peter, because they knew, not because they didn't know. Anybody who didn't know would say, this letter is a lot like this letter. Let's put them together, But it was because they did know, but they said, oh, no, we can't have people finding this out. Not when we need them to come through us, not when we want to have the power, not when, this is about us preserving, our seed on this earth for another 2,000 years, that we're not going to give this up. We're going to take the time that, is left to us, and they did, but now it's time to bind up Satan, and his minions and be done with them. And let the truth actually flow like it is supposed to. Our minds are being renewed. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I wish we had more time, and I'm definitely going to invite you to come on with us again at some other point. But I wanted to read one final quote. This is from the Assumption of Moses, and then I'm going to give you the chance for final commentary. It says this: accordingly, He designed and devised me, speaking of Moses, and He prepared me before the foundation of the world, that I should be the mediator of His covenant. And now I declare unto you that the time of the years of my life is fulfilled, and I am passing away to sleep with my fathers, even in the presence of all the people. And in order and receive this writing, that you may know how to preserve the books which I shall deliver unto you. And you shall set these in order and anoint them with oil of cedar and put them away in earthen vessels in the place which He made from the beginning of the creation of the world, that His name should be called upon until the day of repentance, in the visitation wherewith the Lord will visit them in the consummation of the end of the days. And so here in this passage, Moses speaks about how he was chosen even before the foundation of the world. And we were also similarly called, foreordained for such higher purpose and for role and mission. And it's up to us to realize our specialness and how that relationship with the Father and the Son is so important, and it's important for us to seek the kingdom first and to make that a priority for our lives. Robert, we've got 5 minutes, brother. I want to thank you for joining us for the show. You've been an excellent interview, and I think you've got just a wealth in the world of knowledge, and you've got a lot to say. You should consider doing a show yourselves. But anyways, if you don't mind, final commentary.
Well, none of us should be surprised at this, first of all. I mean, we see Moses where? We see him at the Transfiguration, right? These prophets could see across time. The words you just spoke, how it pertains to the flesh and everything, okay? Well, again, these things are contained in earthen vessels, meaning that the higher spiritual level meanings are couched within earthly terminology. The light is concealed within the image, as it states in the Gospel of Thomas. And when we see people like Moses and Elijah traveling literally across time to be with Jesus, in the presence of Jesus, on the sacred mountain, where Jesus is literally detailing to them events of the future himself. When Jesus says that Abraham saw my day, well, we know that Moses and Elijah saw it because they were there. Moses came down that mountain glowing, literally glowing. Right? And where had he been? Right? He had seen the face of the Lord. He was there. And, we need to understand that Enoch saw this way, that Moses saw this way. All of this information is there for us to know. And they have preserved it for this day. And this is the day. This is where we are. And it's a foregone conclusion. It is going to happen. You do your part or you don't. You help or you don't. You gather or you scatter, right? But it's a day of decision, and you have to decide. And that's what's really important here, is do you have the guts to take this to the people? Do you have the fortitude? Because this is what's been entrusted to us, the faith that was once entrusted to the saints, once for all. And once this is known again, I believe there's a very high expectation for people to be on board. This is why I could not be idle myself, because I understood the duty that was involved in this. And I think you sensed your duty in all this, and I think that anybody who understands this will sense that they have talent, that they have time, that they have gifts, that they have resources, and that they need to do what the prophets have asked them to do, which is to help them to become understood so that we all can have a common collective salvation. Jude was writing to us of our common salvation, not our individual salvation, our common salvation. And that's what this is about. This is about all of us getting out of here. This is about all of us making this happen, And the elect are many. The multitude of the wise is the safety of the world. And that's what God is bringing forth. Anybody who can understand this stuff and can find this stuff and can see this stuff, can chase 1,000. And 2 of us can chase 10,000, It just takes time to act, and it's time to know. And I think the time is short. And all of us see these things happening all around us. You mentioned all the, the grim news in the world. But there's good news, There is an answer to all of this stuff. And it contains an incredible power and an incredible mystery that is absolutely mind-boggling. And that's about all I can say about it at this point. It's huge. It's immense.
That was perfect, brother. And once again, I appreciate you. We're 10 seconds out. I'll see everybody next Sabbath, and we'll definitely bring Robert on with us again. God bless all. Good night.
God bless.
God bless, brother.
What exactly would you say? And just child looked up at you and asked you about God and if he exists and if he's true, and wondered what would happen when someone dies. Is there a heaven? And what about that man up on the cross? Am I forgiven? How exactly would you answer those hopeful little eyes when you're college educated and convinced it's all a lie? Sure, you went to Sunday school when you were young, but that was then. You're above those simple thoughts now. The only God you know is man. Are you saddened and ashamed to tell this little soul that you don't believe in anything and have no reason and no hope? There's no heaven and no meaning. There's no purpose to our lives. Did you believe we're just evolved, random mutations come alive? You know better than an insect, son, and when you die, that's it. I've learned through education that good and bad just don't exist. It's all just evolution. It's survival of the fittest. And we can get you a prescription when your life becomes depressed. I'm sorry that I've crumbled all your hopes and all your dreams, but it's time you realize that life's not what it seems. Are you lost? Are you alone? Are you convinced that life does not make sense? Have you forgotten that God even exists? Have you replaced all that was real for a life of cannabis and created your own truth? A happy atheist? Are you lost? Are you alone? Are you convinced that life does not make sense? Have you forgotten that God even exists? Have you replaced all that was real for a life of cannabis and created your own truth? A happy atheist? You realize your answers could just shatter all these dreams and everything that ever mattered to this precious little being who had belief in certain peace and received that inner voice inside his conscience. His conscious mind believes, and it sickens you to think, cause you've been driven by your ego and your greed, and he sees it. You don't practice what you preach. You've lost your dignity, and you've succeeded in destroying all beliefs and defeated all his real hopes and dreams. They might never be retrieved, and the flame within his heart almost completely is extinguished, and the holes within his soul are filled with mimics, and the message of God's grace within his mind has been diminished, because the answers that you gave him took a piece of his existence, and the power of your words were unforeseen, and in that very moment you destroyed the very purpose of his being, and now he's lost, he's alone, and he's convinced that life does not make sense, and he's forgotten that God even exists. He's replaced all that was real for a life of counterfeits and created his own truth. A happy atheist. Are you lost? Are you alone? Are you convinced that life